I'm ready to slash and burn.
No quarter. I am going to be uncomfortable and all over you from start to finish.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Outside of the Box. And I am incredibly excited. Anybody that knows me knows that I am a huge fan of Deathroll, and was so excited to see this robot come back for World Championship VII. So today I have Steven and Glen from Team Deathroll on the show. Welcome, and I am excited to talk about robots.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yep,
Awesome.
great to be on the podcast.
So, yeah, like it's so funny because to me, since I remember the 2019 season so vividly, I feel like Deathroll's been doing this for so many years. And I mean, like you've had other robots, and Deathroll's been around for a while, but really only in Battlebots for a few seasons. When you look back, there was a Deathroll in 2016. It was a very different version of Deathroll, the one that had the tail, and it definitely didn't have the season that you did in 2019. It was pretty rough. That Deathroll got torn to pieces by Captain Shredderator, and I loved, to be honest, even though the bot wasn't that effective at that point in time, I loved it. As someone who grew up watching Crocodile Dundee and Crocodile Hunter and like all of these things, I mean, like I love crocs, and so I was like, that's an awesome robot.
And I think that's sort of what we did in 2016. It was our first heavyweight for all of us. I don't think any of us on the team had ever made a heavyweight in Australia. There's just not a heavyweight competition here. And that learning curve is very steep. And we went sort of all in with the theatrics a bit more than we probably do these days. So it had a tail, no longer has a tail. It still has a lot of the theming and the head and everything too. But yeah, we've definitely cut back on that a little bit. But that being said, the drive system, the weapon motor, the weapon blade, even in like this year and this season, is exactly the same as what we had in 2016. It's just very much refined.
Yes, lots of editing. I'm sure. Now, I know that you did a bit like with Great White and stuff like that, kind of in between 2016 and 2019. But did that robot really help you with kind of the redesign of Deathroll and what that ended up looking like once we got to that 2019 season?
Yeah, I think 2019 was very heavily inspired by the second series of King of Bots, the Great White there. So a very similar robot competed in 2019 and really took all of the learnings that we had from that series into the 2019 season.
Yes. I'm really curious because, it originally the tail was supposed to act as the self-righting mechanism, kind of, and then you ended up with this severed hand and the knife, which is by far my favorite self-righter ever on any robot. What was the idea behind it? Obviously it goes along with the whole theme, but like, how did you come up with that? Because I think it's terrific.
We don't really have an answer to this. So in Great White, it was a poll. Glenn?
Yeah, it kind of just evolved, didn't it? It was a bit of an afterthought, and it turned into something quite awesome, I guess. Yeah, I guess we just left Jules with it, didn't we? Because Great White just had a metal pole. It didn't look like anything, and we figured since we weren't going to run the tail in 2019, we needed something, a bit better, something with a bit of theatrics to it. So we kind of just left Jules to do a thing, and that's what she gave us, and it was awesome.
Yeah, I think it ended up evolving into something like trying to claw its way out, cut itself out of the robots and escape. But yeah, there wasn't a lot of thought or planning around that. It's just something that sort of naturally evolved over the build.
That's great. I love that that's the story, because like to me, I would have thought that that was like a really seriously thought out thing, and it was just kind of we'll throw this in there. But it's probably one of my favorite things about Deathroll. So and I know a lot of other people love it as well. So you came into 2019, total redesign. Were you, before the season started, were you expecting it to be as good as it was?
We knew it was a lot better than 2016. And I think we knew it was quite capable. And I don't think anybody else knew that. I don't think the producers knew that. I don't think we were meant to win, well, maybe one of those fights. But most of those fights we were meant to lose. And we didn't. So that was a nice way. It's always good to be the underdog and to come out on top. We didn't have a lot of expectations, given we didn't have a very good season with King of Bots leading up to it. I think I vividly remember getting punted out of the arena by E-Man, who was the driver of Big Deal now. So yeah, he unceremoniously removed my robot from the arena in about 3 seconds. So that was the lead up to that season, and that was, yeah, you come in with hope, but you never know what's going to happen when you go in.
Yes, because traditionally, at least, kind of in the beginning, a lot of these robots that have more of a fun theme, or something that's not quite just killer robot, don't always do really well right away. And like that was a season where I was like, yes, like the Deathroll is awesome. You came in, and one of the matches that stuck out to me was beating Endgame via knockout, and not just doing that, but doing it in under 2 minutes. And it was the season before they won the Giant Nuts, but they were still at that point thought of as a very strong robot, and I think that surprised a lot of people.
Look, Endgame's still a very, very strong robot. And like, I think in that fight, we won through like a bit of a war of attrition. there was a lot of damage going both ways. We just happened to nudge them out in the reliability factor there. And that being said, like, although we won the fight, that could have gone either way. But yeah, it was a very, very tough battle, and it was really a big first test for us in that season, and made that season a very satisfying, but also a lot of effort going into keeping those robots running after taking some serious damage in a lot of those fights. I think, Glenn, do you remember how many gashes, how many bits we had to cut off that robot after that fight?
Oh yeah, I think it was a solid 2 or 3 days of like non-stop repairing. We pretty much had to cut the whole front off the robot, and Miles and Jules spent all that time out in the sun grinding and cutting. Yeah, there was a lot of work that went into getting that one going again, for sure.
Yeah, because it's a big season, really, and you got to have your robots go for the whole time. And yeah, we had to work hard in 2019.
Truly though, like you said, with Endgame, even if you manage to win, you're probably not going to come out of that unscathed by any means, because their weapon is just so powerful and dangerous. But it was like a huge win, and I feel like something that maybe got people to stand up and be like, oh, like Deathroll might do something here. And I don't think that continued for some time, because, and I recently talked to Junior of the Minotaur team about the match versus Minotaur, which was one of the hardest matches for me to watch as a fan, because I love both teams, 2 of my favorites, and I'm like, I don't know who's going to win. I don't really know who I want to win. Like, either way, this is going to be spectacular. And fortunately for you, it went in Deathroll's favor, versus just a very, very strong bot year in and year out. So that had to be pretty huge as well.
Yeah, that was a massive win for us. I think we went into that fight not really sure what would happen. They'd had a bit of a hard season, and I don't think they were functioning at sort of their top level. But the fight was pretty brief. I think you dealt out a few massive hits, but coming out that afterwards and seeing the damage that was done, like I think we cracked one of their solid aluminium machine plates in half, and it was just beached on that. Yeah, it was short and brief, and a very vicious battle, that one there. Just some massive blows, but it's always with those fights, going into them, you never know what's going to happen, and I think that's where the competition's got to. Everybody can dish out serious damage on you, and it's as much as some bots are a little bit above others, you never really know which way it's going to go.
Right. Yeah. So, that was a big win. And honestly, at that point, when you beat Minotaur, in my mind as a fan, I was like, oh my God, like Deathroll's going to win the Giant Nut this year. Like, just because of the run that you had been on, I was very convinced that was going to happen. And then as it does for a lot of, robots that are performing really well, ended up going against Witch Doctor, who is also just like an amazing robot, like amazing builders, and Mike and Andrea, and didn't win that match. I know that was obviously some time ago, but what were your takeaways from that?
Honestly, I think by that point in the actual competition, we were all pretty done. It was a very long time. I think we'd worked so hard, and we were disappointed with the loss, but at the same time, like, very happy with where we'd got to in that season. And it's such how we lost because we lost our weapon in that fight, and something can go wrong very easily. And in that fight, it did. And like, we got beaten up pretty hard. But it's just the way it goes, and you can't really look at that and like feel that sums up your whole season. It would have been nice to win and go all the way, but at the end of the day, you have to be happy with the show we put on and the fights we won, and really setting ourselves up as a competitor who will get an invite back every year. And I think that was really just seeding us in the competition and making sure that Deathroll was a mainstay of what Battlebots is moving forward.
Yes, definitely. I couldn't agree more with that. And kind of speaking of, like you said, being invited back every year, you were accepted for season 5. However, COVID hit, and because of that, there were restrictions, and that prevented you from coming back for a couple of seasons. I just wanted to kind of talk about like how difficult that was for you to want to do it, but not be able to do it.
I think initially, like, we were ready to go. Like, the robot that we brought.
Yeah, we had the robots. Had the robots still in the crate sitting there. Everything was packed, ready to go. We were just kind of, sitting there, crossing our fingers, wondering if we were going to get any exemptions or anything like that. It was a pretty confusing time.
Yeah, it was definitely like, when those robots that we fought this year are the robots that we built in 2020. And I think getting them back out end of last year was difficult. Like, it's hard to get back to where you were. Like, there was so many discussions of like, what were we thinking 2 years ago when we made this thing? Like, where are our bits? How many of these do we have? And just getting back into it, really, I think it was hard. Yeah. Do you have anything to add there, Glenn, about the journey back?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of a unique situation that's only shared between a few teams. But yeah, trying to pick up from where you left off effectively 2 years prior was really difficult. As Steve said, trying to work out what parts you'd already made, what parts had to be made, things like that. Like, I kind of feel like it would have been easier to just start from scratch a few times there. But yeah, we did eventually get it all together, and it was good in the end.
Yeah, it's hard too, because the turnaround from the 2019 to 2020 was pretty short, and we made a lot of compromises in that design period there just to get it done in time to go in January. Like, it was January again, and I think coming back, when you have something finished, it's hard to sort of throw it all away and start again. And we tried to make compromises and change things, but effectively we had robots that we built in 2020, and things have moved on a little bit in 2 years in like the technology and the teams, and a lot of experience from other teams who got those extra 2 years of fights in.
Yes, it's amazing how much, I mean, because everybody continually talks about the experience aspect. You know, you don't know exactly what your robot's going to do unless it's competing against other robots. So it's really difficult to predict. And even if something worked before, that doesn't mean that 2 years from now, you know, that it's going to work the same way. And I think that's where that risk reward as a builder comes in, where sometimes people might change a couple of things, sometimes they might redesign the whole robot. And, you know, either way, I think it's a risk, but, you know, you don't know how it's going to pay off until you actually get in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have a bit of a running joke in our team that everyone has an off year in between their good years. Just when you change things, you work out you made it worse, then you change them all back. So maybe, yeah, we'll we've got some ideas for what we'll do next time, but hopefully it's not 2 years again before we make it back.
Let's hope not. Now, you know, speaking of the most recent season, which is World Championship Season 7, which just filmed at the end of last year, and now we're finally seeing that on TV, at least over here stateside. And the first match that you had was against Cobalt. And it's funny because, you know, I was like, yes, you know, the first match with Deathroll, and I'm like, but they're fighting Cobalt. You know, just because Cobalt has, I mean, you know, obviously Deathroll does too, but like Cobalt has a massively destructive weapon. I mean, we've seen them completely obliterate robots. And, you know, when I saw that match, I'm like, this could go a couple of ways, but I'm well aware of where Cobalt's weapon sits on their robot in comparison to like when they're coming face to face with your robot. And it seemed like that created a bit of an issue during that fight. So kind of like take me through what happened in that fight from your perspective, you know, and is there anything you think you could have done differently?
Glenn?
Oh, yeah, that was a real tough fight. I guess it really showed the difference between 2019 and this latest season. Obviously, Deathroll doesn't have any ground game whatsoever, I suppose. We just rely on the blade hanging out of the robot so far. And we knew Cobalt was going to bring a really good ground game. We'd seen they had an array of wedges and things like that in their pit. So we knew we weren't going to get him that way. And I guess we were just kind of hoping we could kind of out survive them like endgame. Maybe hit one of their critical areas, like their weapon pulleys are a little bit exposed. And also just maybe if we got one big hit on them, we were hoping we could just tip them upside down and they get stuck because they hadn't really self-righted that well in the past. And yeah, I guess that's why we kind of just rushed them as hard as we could in the opening few seconds to see if we could just knock them over. But yeah, they were really strong with their ground game. It was pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, and I don't know whether it really showed, but like they put a big hole in our robot.
Yeah, we literally had to angle grind the weapon motor out of the robot because a piece of frame got bent into it, which is never good.
Yeah, it was yeah. There was no way we were repairing that motor after that. So without a weapon, we were upside down, and I was tempted to wiggle back over, and you're like, no, don't wiggle back.
We needed that.
We need more. Yeah, that we have to do more fights.
Yeah, because that's an interesting thing for this past season. I mean, like, you know, obviously a lot has changed since 2019, and one of those is a lot of the rule set. And, you know, one of those now is that if the robot moves, it's still hittable. There's no crab walking, you know, no, is there controlled movement? It's just, if it moves, you hit it. So, you know, there's that strategy of if you don't want to be hit anymore, that it's probably best to not move.
Yeah, and I think we saw that a little bit this season, just because there was so many fights. The 4 fights in the preseason is a lot of fights, and when it's, you don't notice it when the show, but those fights are compressed into what, like 2 and a bit weeks, and you need to keep these things running, and you only have so many parts, and you only have so many sets of frames and sets of bits, and it's a big factor. And when you're upside down and immobile and disabled, like we didn't have a weapon, like, yeah, sure, we could have flipped back over, and well, we maybe could have flipped back over. We were pretty bent, but yeah. Let's not say I could have. I want to think I could have, but
you were
probably
trying.
not true. But then you're like, well, is this really worth it? Like, why write it off completely now? Because without a weapon, Cobalt's still got a weapon. You're just going to take damage for no real reason. And I think we saw that a little bit throughout this season, and particularly in the preseason, just because you've got to be a little bit more strategic in how you think when there's that many fights.
Yes, absolutely. And kind of speaking of that and the fact that you got to see your whole schedule, obviously, since those fights haven't, been shown yet, we can't talk about the exact details, but, when you saw who your schedule, who you were going to be up against, Switchback, who's come in for their second season with a completely different redesign, Mammoth, who's always a challenge to fight just because of their unique design, and then Monsoon, who is another team that's been away for a couple of years, but just, has a very nasty robot as well. Just what were your thoughts when you kind of saw who you were going to be matched up against?
I think it's really, you got to plan about what's going to happen there. And our days and schedule fell pretty fortunately. We had a lot of time between Cobalt and our next fight to put it back together, and we were going into it. We're sort of like, all right, well, this is going to be either way. This is going to be, we're going to be busy after this, but we've got the time to put it back together. And I think that sort of seeing what our schedule was allowed us to make decisions as to. So we had 2 frames as to which frame goes in where and which one does what, and how it sort of progresses through that fight. And as they change, they start the same, and then they change throughout the competition. And you get to pick, well, does this one go in this one, or does this one go in this one? And yeah, you can sort of be a bit more strategic as time goes on.
Yeah. And I'm also curious because, the last time that you were at Battlebots, different location, different venue, now they're in Vegas. Was there anything different about that for you? Is it just kind of like the same as what you remember? Because to me, it seems like probably the being in the pits with all the other builders and, going out and doing the matches, there's probably not a lot different about that.
No, nothing really different. I think the main change for us was the floor. I don't know if you remember 2019, but you couldn't play with wedges the way you can now. And that's probably the main thing that stood out from us as far as the actual battle box changed. Oh, and there's the shelf. We'll not talk about the shelf. But that change really changes what you can do. And we got away with a lot more in 2019, just because people who tried to do things that you can do now just got stuck. We saw Cobalt get stuck just on its lots on debris and other little bits and pieces around the arena. To be fair, they redesigned their robot to that. But the same with the wedges, getting stuck under the floor and everything else. We tried wedges in our first match, and we're like, well, it worked better after we got rid of them, so we'll just ditch these in 2019. And then we sort of went all into that in 2020, and we were still there this year, and yeah. Things have changed. So that's probably the biggest change in the actual setup for us. As far as the location, not much different. I think post-COVID, everything was a little bit more. I don't think we had quite as much fun in between the matches as we did in 2019. It's a bit more subdued with all the builders in the pits, and everyone sort of kept to themselves a little bit more. Would be just one of my sort of, I guess, not disappointing, but changes in the last couple of years. We kept to ourselves pretty much as well. But yeah, there's a lot more focus on the robots than the party after every day.
Yeah, and I mean it would be tough to, it was my first time in Vegas, and to me, I think it would be tough to not want to go out and do, because there's so much that you can do in Vegas, but also like the level of competition has risen so much that I think you have to be so much more focused on what you're doing with your robot and making sure that you're working on it all the time to keep it at the level to compete with everybody else that's there, because it's just, everybody's so good now.
Yeah, and I think we were tourists for a little bit, but we're there for the robots, and like we were in the pits at 9 a.m. most days, and we left at 10 p.m. most days, and that's a big day, but it's sort of where we want to be. We want to watch the fights, we want to see how everybody did, and we want to go around and have a look at what's happened in the last few years. And yeah, it was definitely interesting walking around the first couple of days and just seeing how far things have come. I think, I don't know, one of our insights were that like we walked around seeing like billet titanium of emulsifier and like these other crazy things that people are doing. And we're like, here we are with our little welded steel chassis. How's this going to play out? Yeah, it's amazing how much things have changed in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I would think that would have had to be an interesting experience, because I mean, when I think back to 2019, there's a lot of robots that are, pretty top competitors now that weren't even around then, and others that just don't really resemble that much of their former selves, what they looked like before. So, I would think that would have been neat to kind of see how things have evolved and what new things people are doing, because I mean, you have robots like Blip and Tantrum that have these, kind of unique weapon mechanisms, and then you have Ripperoni as a rookie robot and like the things that they're doing. So it's just a lot of really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. Glenn, what do you think is the coolest thing we saw in the pits this year?
Oh, yeah, there was a lot going on. There were definitely a few pit tables we frequented more than others, looking for ideas. But yeah, it is pretty interesting. Just in the like the 2 years we were away, just the things people are trying now, like literally didn't exist in 2019. Like Claw Viper's magnets, they were just amazing. Yeah, like use of titanium and yeah, magnets and torque technology and everything like that. It was pretty amazing to see how it just went from like it did not exist in 2019 to how refined it is in 2020. It was 2022. Sorry, it was really eye opening. Sure.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely been a step up in both the drive power and the weapon power. And there's some of us who are hanging on to the past and its reliability, and others who are pushing the boundaries in what's possible. And I think, I guess Ripperoni is a good example of that with that counter spinning flywheel, just something completely different. That just going all in on an idea and seeing if it works is something we saw a lot of too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, we'll see how the rest of this season goes. But we're already at the point where there's the talk of World Championship Season 8 and sounding like the likelihood of that happening sooner than expected, possibly in the summer. That's a pretty quick turnaround. Is at this point, is that something that you're shooting for? And, if so, do you plan on trying to make a lot of changes to Deathroll kind of now that you've had this new experience after a couple of years?
We've had a lot of discussions over the past sort of couple of months, and I think particularly in the pits after we sort of finished up our fights, just sitting around talking about, well, what's possible, what can we actually do? Because it's a big time sink, and there's a lot of work that goes into making this, and we have a lot of history and we have a lot of stuff we know works, and it's finding that balance between what to change and what to keep. And there's some constraints on really where we've sort of landed with our design, and what we can do from there. So there's a few plans, but I don't know whether there's anything set in stone yet.
Yeah, I think we're still we're still recovering really from the last season. Just trying to work out sort of what we, as Steve said, what we have, because we do have a lot of spare parts from previous seasons that we don't really want to just throw in the bin because they're quite big money. So we've got to work out sort of where we can go from here, what parts we can retain and sort of push forward, what things we have to replace and what have you. It's all just kind of swirling around at the moment. I don't think we have anything set in stone.
Because I think there's a few key areas that we know aren't sort of where they need to be. We've got our weapon speed is about half of what the top competitors are spinning at, the tip speed, and that's something we could fix pretty easily. But then that cascades down the chain of, well, we throw away our speed controllers for that weapon motor, and we have to come with another solution for that. And then there's the obvious question of, well, do we put some massive wedges hanging a meter out the front on it? But then that's our drivetrain isn't really up to pushing anybody around as soon as those hit somebody. So how do you get up and underneath your competitors? And it's really that if you want to make changes, you have to go back and change a lot of parts along the way. And it's hard because we've sort of reached, I think we basically decided we've reached the pinnacle of where we can get to with what we have. There's no way to make the robot better and more reliable with the current set of parts we've got in there. It's as good as it's going to get. So it's where do we go from here, and what do we do? And the temptation is to throw it all out the window and start again from scratch, but that's probably not realistic in the time frame that we're talking about here either. So it's we only got the crate back 2 weeks ago, so we still have to take a little bit of stock and work out where we are. But it's a tough one, and I'm not really sure what exactly we're going to do moving forwards.
Well, I certainly hope to see Deathroll back. It was way too long for Deathroll to be gone. It's just, like I said, such an amazing robot, and has shown tremendous potential in the past. And I definitely would love to kind of see it back to that. We'll obviously see how the rest of the season goes, because honestly, even though I was there at the few final days of filming, I don't know anything about these qualifying matches. So who knows what's going to happen? But I'm very excited to see. I certainly wish your team the best of luck, and I'm so thankful that you took the time to come on and talk with me, especially because we're in very different time zones. In fact, today is Sunday for you and Saturday for me. So really excited that we got the chance to do this.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us, and it was really great to chat. And there's some spectacle in store for everybody in the show coming forward. So make sure you tune into the next Deathroll fights coming up.
Yes, tune into the show and continue to tune into this show as there's going to be quite the lineup of discussions for the rest of the season. A lot to be excited about. I think this is going to be the best season of Battlebots ever. So we'll see if that comes to pass. But just like, subscribe, comment, all of that stuff. Let me know what you think, and we'll definitely see everybody the next time on the show.